Hello, everyone. This is the New Frontier Africa on the CABS World TV live studio from Washington, D.C. I am AdbulRasheed Abubakar. On the show today, I have two guests who will be joining me to discuss the U.S. Eritrea Unfiltered story. I have Mr. Amanuel Biedemariam, tourism industry expert based in Washington, D.C. I also have Professor Berhe Habte, Professor Emeritus, Rowan University, Alpharetta, Georgia. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hello, Amanuel. How are you today?
Excellent. Mr. AdbulRasheed, thank you for having us. And thank you for giving us a chance to talk about the history of the USA in Eritrea. And to be here with you and Dr. Berhe is an honor.
Dr. Berhe, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing fine, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thank you. So, Amanuel, in the book, you spoke exclusively about the USA inside the Eritrea. Let me go quickly into the first session that caught my attention. You said, after all, it was the United Nations that determined the fate of Eritrea with the federation that united it with Ethiopia in 1952 and the unchallenged illegal annexation in 1962. And you said, I have people said that the US uses its influence at the UN to undermine the Eritrean sovereignty. Can you tell me more about this?
Thank you. The history of the USA and Eritrea is really unique. It's an African history. It's the beginning of the post-World War II US-Africa journey. And it started right there in Eritrea. While the war was going on in 1942, the United States was intent on coming into Eritrea for a number of reasons. And there were four key reasons that the United States wanted to come into Eritrea. First of all, it is a very strategic location on the Red Sea. So they wanted to control the key choke points of the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Suez Canal, which enabled them to control vast territory that's rich in oil and a lot of other resources. And it's also a strategic military chokeholds. The second reason was the Soviet Union. The United States did not want the influence of the Soviet Union to be there in Africa, so that in any way that they can control the situation there. So that's another reason. The third objective was to be able to come into Africa through the African Union, with Haile Selassie. As you know, the African Union started in 1962-63, but the plan for it was way ahead of that. So it gave the United States an opportunity for the first time. As you know, the United States did not have a colony in Africa, except for maybe in Liberia, which you cannot consider a colony, but it has U.S. influence in there. And the fourth most important part of it was they wanted to have an intelligence base in Eritrea, which is where they put their listening satellites, listening posts that listen to countries and all over the world, right? The Soviet Union, Japan, and different places all around the world. From Eritrea, they were able to put a satellite and to do intelligence around the world. So these were the four key reasons. And in order to make that happen, the United States decided that it is better for Eritrea to be a part of Ethiopia. And so they facilitated a process in the United Nations to enable that. So that is how the United Nations was able, the United Nations was able to become a part of the federation process and ended up federating Eritrea. And after a period of time, by 1962, they got the the green light to annex Eritrea, and that triggered the movement for the independence of Eritrea. And so that is how the United States, the United Nations nexus comes about, and that's how it played out. It's a lot more detailed, but that's the overall picture of how the United States and the United Nations came together.
Thank you, Amanuel, for that thoughtful insights. Let me go to Professor. Professor, let's talk a little bit about the federation process.
Well, when Eritrea, after the end of the Second World War, with the defeat of the Italians, Eritrea was temporarily being administered by a caretaker government, the British military administration. It was very important that final decision be made before the British left, because they couldn't stay there indefinitely. The United Nations, it was a new organization at that time. There was little in terms of decolonization in Africa. So Eritrea was, or the ex-Italian colonies, Libya, Somalia, and Eritrea, were the first countries that came on the agenda of decolonization. And in the case of Eritrea, because of the presence of Ethiopia, it was a complicated process. Ethiopia has befriended itself with the United States thanks to advisors, political advisors. The emperor got, starting from the time of his exile in Europe, in England, American advisors, experts were working closely with him, and they helped him establish close communication with the government of the United States. For example, while the Second World War was going on, Roosevelt was in Egypt, and Haile Selassie went to the Suez Canal, where Roosevelt's ship was docked, and he met with him and reached, agreement on the future of his country, the future of Eritrea, and so on. So Ethiopia was advised and helped by these American advisors like Spencer, who wrote a book about the whole process anyway. And it became a process that the United States could understand and enjoy and like, and put him in a direction that in the future would also be useful in terms of influencing developments in Africa when the decolonization of the whole continent would come. And so the next thing they did was, before the question of decolonization comes, the Ethiopia, Imperial Ethiopia, became a very staunch ally of the United States and the Western allies in the Cold War. That's why in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, Ethiopia sent a battalion of troops to fight in the Korean War. And that opened a whole gamut of assistance and advice and all that military help that the Ethiopians got. They got a new shipment of military armaments. The Ethiopian military got reorganized. And in the future development of Africa, they had to play a very important role.
Okay.
So the friendship that developed between Ethiopia and the United States, was very fundamental to the interests of the two countries, and they knew they could help each other and be of use, to each other. In this instance, the little guys like Eritrea had to suffer. It was the sacrificial lamb that was put on the altar for the friendship of the United States and Ethiopia.
Professor, hold your thought for a second for me. Amanuel, you mentioned that the history of Eritrea is one of the most brilliant stories of success. You said it is a unique history, different from the rest of Africa. What do you mean?
Well, you know, the totality of the history, how
Right,
we came about as a nation
right,
from the beginning of the struggle in 1962, 1961,
right,
up until 1991. The way we fought, we ended up fighting the United States, Ethiopian troops, the Soviet Union, Yemen, Cuba, all of them were helping the Ethiopian government. During the Cold War, we had to fight both sides. And what makes it so interesting is there was no help from anybody, not from the African Union, not from the European Union, from any part of the world. The Eritrean people had to struggle on their own to be self sufficient, rely on themselves, to fight against Ethiopian troops, take away their military armaments, and use that against them. For that, everybody was involved, every Eritrean was involved. And it has so many different dimensions to it. The people of Eritrea abroad, the people of Eritrea inside Eritrea, the way they were able to fight against all these injustices and eventually prevail was something that is untold in the history of Africa. And the history of Africa, I mean, the history of Eritrea is unique in that um, it was a time when the United States entered Africa, and also after the Cold War, when the United States defeated the Soviet Union, it is where the Clinton administration really staked its repositioning of Africa and Eritrea, and a lot of other places in the region. So Eritrea played a key role right after World War II. That is where the end of the British Empire ended, kind of handed the baton to the United States. That's when the African Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa comes. That's when the United States was able to divide this two, portions of Africa, Anglophone and Francophone. The reason that happened is when they came into Africa at that time, the CIA determined it is better for the weakened French and English army that was weakened by the German military to be supported. So they did the Marshall Plan to support them. And they also made sure that they stayed in Africa so they can be a partner to the United States.
So I want you to tell me, what is that one thing that is unique about the history of Eritrea that makes it different from the rest of Africa?
Resilience and the ability to be able to do things on your own. The way that we came about, we were not handed our freedom. We earned it by blood. We paid 65 to 70,000 people that died to create independence, to bring independence to life. And also, millions of Eritreans and hundreds of thousands of Eritreans were dispersed. And we were able to pull off independence. When all African nations were handed independence, Eritrea was denied independence. And
so
to be able
let's fast forward a little bit. You mentioned something that is very interesting to me in the book, because I read the book as well. So you said I arrived in the US, people have asked me where I was from. Everywhere I went and everyone I met asked me the same question. And when I told them I came from Eritrea, after struggling to pronounce Eritrea for a minute, they would ask, where is Eritrea? That is very, very interesting to me, because this happened to many other Africans as well. If you say you are from Morocco, for example, after struggling to pronounce Morocco, some people will say, pronounce Morocco in a very different way. So after struggling to pronounce that country, then they will ask you, where is Morocco? So which is similar to Morocco. So if you say you are from Congo, for example, so and so on and so forth. Why did you bring out this particular, philosophy?
Well, the history of the Eritrea after World War II is the history of the United States of America, and it's unfortunate the people in the United States are not familiar with what the United States did in Eritrea, and it's actually one of the first battles that was won during World War II. The Northern Africa theater of war in World War II. So, you see a lot of history, World War II history, and the monuments in Washington, D.C., but none of the African history is reflected in that. And so I wanted to be able to bring attention to it. But there's also another thing. The history of the United States is my history. I wanted to know why in 1974 a new government came in Ethiopia. The Mengistu Haile the communist regime came, and then that became a source for exodus of Eritreans. 1978, 79, I was forced to get out of the country, and all the process that I went to in the 1980s to come to the United States. And when I came here, everything that I went through became my story. And also it's the story of the Eritrean community. The Eritrean community went through the same thing. And we were also part of the fight. It's a part of the American history. It's part of African history. And I wanted to bring that to life to Africans. This is African history, to Ethiopians, to Eritreans, because it touches Ethiopian history, touches American history, the French, Italian history. There's so many different dimensions to the Eritrean history, the US history in Eritrea, that Africans, Eritreans, Ethiopians must research. And now with the Freedom of Information Act being there, you can research, do a lot of research. And this is for all Africans. And this is just.
So thank you, Amanuel. Let me get some insight from Professor Berhe. Professor Amanuel echoed in the book, The History of the USA in Eritrea, that most Eritreans don't document, write their history. They like to tell the history to the children and to their great-grandchildren. He echoed that, Eritreans abroad, home and abroad, should engage more in writing down those, histories, so that way people, will have more access to it. What is your take on this?
Well, that's true. In a way, it's a burden that most Eritreans living abroad, can carry. It's more than they can carry, because a lot of people have to eke out a living one way or the other, support the freedom movement and struggle for independence when it was going on. And after independence, support families and themselves and their children, to make a living. And there are also few people who have access to information. A lot of this information is from hearsay or the communication that we used to get, from our community or organizational meetings. Those of us who were involved in supporting the struggle, most of us were. But we also didn't have the tradition of writing. And we are an oral society, and people were passing, traditions and folklores by word of mouth. But now that's changing. A lot of people are writing, but what they are writing is their own diaries, small pieces of information that you could get from different people. Probably if you can patch it up together, you may get a whole picture. We don't see general kind of work that involves a whole spectrum of events, developments over a period of time, or important, developments and events in the past. We don't see that happening. So now this is the task for people like me who have been retired, for a few years from now. And Amanuel, who did a good job, sets the example. And there are some individuals, who are making up, for this thing.
Distant. Okay. So Amanuel, I have a couple of friends from Eritrea, and I've spoken to them, and I got a visa to travel to Eritrea. Last year. Some of my friends they are very concerned about me traveling to Eritrea because people have these reservations that the government you know is not open to to everyone. Most especially if you are a journalist, the government is kind of very strict as to who comes into the country and so on and so forth. What do you think about this, Emmanuel?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is it's really um, nonsense. That's just how you can characterize it. But when you go deeper, it goes to a much deeper situation. What that is Eritrea was slated to be isolated, to be sanctioned, to be a pariah state. That is the narrative that they wanted to create, and they created that effectively around the world. They wanted to label Eritrea a state that sponsors terrorism. In 2008, right at the end of the Bush administration, and when that failed, they came back and they said that uh, Eritrea is a rogue nation, and that they created a situation about Djibouti, and they put connected that with Somalia, and they ended up putting sanctions. So the demonization of Eritrea was deliberate and intent. And there are so many people that pretend to be Eritrean or be Eritreans, and people that ask for asylum in the United States, people that don't like the government of Eritrea, they say that. Nothing will ever touch you. If you go to Eritrea, you will probably find one of the most peaceful African nations ever. Because in Eritrea, women can travel in the middle of the night by themselves. Nobody touches them. Um,
And as a foreigner, as a U.S. citizen, I can travel freely in Eritrea. Is that what you're telling me?
Absolutely. There is absolutely no impediment in any way for you. If the government of Eritrea trusts you enough to give you a visa, you have absolutely no problem to see everything. I can personally take you anywhere you want to go. The government of Eritrea is very open, accessible. The leadership of Eritrea is extremely humble. The demonization of Eritrea.
Okay, so okay, let me talk to you more about why the U.S. targeted Eritrea. Because in your book, I find some interesting things that you spoke about the previous administration of the United States, and part of the thing you mentioned was the Kenso base. Am I pronouncing it right?
And your station base.
Station base. So you mentioned that base in Eritrea, and you mentioned in the book that the U.S. Army and their family live in the base, and it's in Massawa, correct?
No, maybe let me just tell you that the U.S. had a base in the city of Asmara where I grew up.
Okay.
That base was a city within a city. We were outside the vicinity of the base.
Okay.
So that base was a secret compound for U.S. intelligence. That's where the U.S. satellite dishes were available. The U.S. military was there. They had thousands of soldiers there. They had their own shops, stores, movie theaters, everything.
Yes.
It was a city within a city, and they also had separate compounds in the city of Massawa and Karen.
Okay.
And so, but to go back to your question, why the United States and how the U.S. policy, the previous policy, which started in 1942 and ended in 1991,
Okay.
could have ended U.S. policy in Africa. But in 1991, the Bush administration was there. And 2 years later, the Clinton administration took over. This is the first time the U.S. was operating in Africa post-Cold War, post-Soviet competition. So the Clinton administration had an opportunity to really come up to Africa and to institute a new policy. So, but rather than instituting a new policy, they ended up going back, restarted the old policy that started in 1942, 1945, which is to use anchor states in different African countries, Nigeria being one of the anchor states, and South Africa, Ethiopia, and Algeria. These were the four key states that the United States wanted to have, established relations through which they can really penetrate Africa and control a lot of the small countries in Africa. So Ethiopia is an anchor state. And when Bill Clinton took administration in 1993, he came in January of 1993. Eritrea became independent in 1993. On April 15, the Eritrean people conducted a federation, and in May, Eritrea became independent. So it
May 24th, right?
May 24th. Thank you. So that coincided with the coming of the Clinton administration. So initially, when the Clinton administration came, he was friendly to all the African leaders at that time. He was courting Meles, Kagame, Museveni, and President Isaias. And so there was just this new era in Africa, and he called the Renaissance men of Africa. But the Ethiopian regime at that time had a different idea of what they wanted to do. They wanted to bring back they wanted to really basically recolonize Eritrea, to bring it back to the control of Eritrea. So that's when the policy of the US really shifted, and they went back to the anchor state idea that they wanted to do. And with the anchor states, what they had is a lot of regional economic communities, regional economic blocs like ECOWAS, SENSAD, IGAD, and all these different organizations through which the US economic activities, diplomatic activities, and political activities were to be funneled through. And Eritrea was, again, one more time, a target for the United States to become a part of Ethiopia. And so they went back to that policy. And so that's where the policy restarted again.
Thank you so much, Amanuel, for that, insights. I really want to go deep with you on the book, but I want people to have opportunity to go ahead and order the book and also read the book. Before we go, you talk about so many things, but one of the things that I want to point out here also is the fact that you said, I would ask, have you heard of Eritrea? Do you know where it is located? Do you know the history of the US in Eritrea? The answers are always no. Then I would ask, did you know that the US had a military base in Eritrea? I will see an expression of surprise, but the answer remained the same. It was always no. It is at that point that I will try to educate and explain the history and its impact. They all hear with amazement and fascination. So these are the things that, I see that is very key in the book, and how you try to enlighten and educate people with your question, back and forth when people ask where you're from. The first chapter and the second chapter, the fourth chapter in the book. You also talk about the UN Charter and also the people behind the moves. So these are some of the things that you talk about the U.S. legacy in Eritrea. So tell me, let me talk to you and Professor about the U.S. legacy in Eritrea. So what are the things now that the U.S. Army, they are now out of Eritrea? So what legacy would you say the U.S. left behind in Eritrea?
Is that for me or Dr. Berhe?
From you first.
Oh, there's positive and negative, and U.S. Africa history, U.S. Eritrea history is in a way similar. The U.S.
So let's talk about the positive first. Then we'll go back to the negative.
Well, I mean, the positives are the American culture is very attractive, especially to young people. One of the things that the United States had in the base was they had a radio station. They had it's good, Ganyo station. They had an AM and FM radio station. They had a television station. So they brought in all their programming in there, and so we were as kids, we were able to watch Little House in the Prairie, Bonanza, Mud Squad. We watched basketball. We were able to watch a lot of different things, but most importantly, the Kanyo station base was really sending out music, and the music was, 5-6 years old kid. You don't have any other foreign access to music. We were listening to music of different genres. Just that our families, our bigger brothers and sisters, would play music from Kanyo station, so we had access to country, blues, jazz. Rock and roll, everything came unfiltered. So that gave us an opportunity to really get exposed to the American culture, in a very unique way. And
so those are the positive things, right?
You can consider them positive. In a country that is culturally culturally conservative, religiously conservative, just Western infusion could be considered negative. But for somebody like me, a kid growing up, it exposed me to some things that are different. Eritrea was just very dynamic. We had different cultures, different people from different backgrounds because of the Italian colony, and just the British were there. And when the United States came, Ethiopians came. The Egyptians were there, Yemenis were there. So Eritrea had exposure from a lot of different sources. But the United States was unique because it was an intelligence base that was very sensitive, and they were trying to be very careful on how they injected the American culture in there. So when the 4th of July came, they will give the people access, so people actually go into the compounds and just visit the American compound. And I remember as a kid, probably, 4th grade or something, when the United States went to the moon, came back, they brought the moon rock, and that moon rock was brought into Eritrea, Asmara, and it was displayed in an area called Expo. And so as kids, we had to line up, and from my school, and we ended up going all the way there. And so there are some good positives that come up, but where it comes problematic is the
I want the professor to give me his own side of that. Professor Berhe, give me the negative side, of this process.
Well, I don't know. I grew up, when I was growing up, the high school I went to was just across the street from the army base, the Kagano station, military base. And we had very close contact with the school there, high school there. We used to have basketball matches, soccer matches, and before the Christmas, celebrations, they used to come to our school or take us to their school and sing Christmas carols and have parties and things like that. So those are the positive things. And another positive thing I can think of is at a time when the economy was so bad in Eritrea for many, many years after the Second World War. Kagno Station, the military base, was a good source of employment for many people, many, many people. But on the negative side, now we see the political part of it, the consequences behind it. The Ethiopian government was taking advantage of this military base. Their payback came in the form of completely obliterating Eritrea when the Americans were there, when the American base was there. Of course, it's none of their business to interfere in internal affairs, but the rights of Eritreans under the federal system was being obliterated completely. And when the federal system was abolished illegally, without following any kind of procedure, some countries, I understand, I don't have the source right now, but some people told me that the French government wanted to raise the issue in the United Nations, the abrogation of the federal system in Eritrea. The Americans told them not to do that. And they were protecting them. To me, those are the worst parts, the worst negative parts, you know. The payback for Ethiopia was coming by the United States actually siding Ethiopia and everything that it was doing in Eritrea.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you so much, my brother Amanuel Biedemariam. I want to engage more with you on the history of Eritrea and the people of Eritrea. We will talk more on this in our next shows. And what message, as a young man, as as an expert, tourism expert in the industry, what message do you have for Eritreans in the diaspora, Amanuel?
Well, I think one thing that Eritreans must know, a lot of Eritreans left after the war. It was Ethiopia, 1998 and 2000, and most of the refugees that came between 2000 and 2012 and 13, 14, they come not from the background of the struggle, but they came after the independence of Eritrea. Right. So they have a totally different experience. So the struggle that we went through, we were in schools, churches, everywhere. We went everywhere to educate people about Eritrea, to really let them know what was going on, the tortures, the killings that was happening in Eritrea in the 1980s and So we laid out a foundation for that. And also what they need to understand is their plight is not the first in the history of Eritrea. The plight of Eritreans came right after World War II, when they started dispersing with the war in World War II. And then when Ethiopia took over, and then Eritreans were forced to flee to Ethiopia because a lot of the industries were taken away. But still, Eritreans were working for their and supporting their country. The same thing in the 70s and 80s. It was unique in the 2000s because these people came for their own purposes. And so they need to understand the totality of the picture of the Eritrean plight, and then learn their history and make sure that they are a part and connected to what's happening in Eritrea, independent from their beliefs, political beliefs, or what they see, perceive of the government of Eritrea. That's the only way Africans in general, Eritreans in particular, can really reconnect back with Africa, play a part in the future of Africa, because we are the drained brain. We can energize Africa with our brains, with our resources. And in order to do that, we have to understand our history, the African history. The Eritrean history is the African history. It's part of American history. So they need to understand that and dig deeper and make sure to not be derogatory, negative about Eritrea, but always be positive and try to bring in a positive energy in some way or the other.
Professor, what would you like to tell the Eritrean diaspora watching the show today?
Could you say that again? Repeat the question for me, please.
I say, what would you like to tell the Eritrean diaspora watching the show today?
When we talk about the Eritrean diaspora, we are talking about, probably at least two generations. One that is, born in Eritrea or Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and other places, and came here. And the other ones are the second generation or the last generation that were born here and raised here. We have done a lot, as parents to inculcate in the new generation of Eritreans born here about the history and the situation in Eritrea and develop sense of belongingness with them. But that slowly fades away. And there's a big problem because they have foreigners, Africans born in the United States are subjected to dual or triple kind of isolation. I would simply call it isolation and that, or alienation. And that is as foreigners, as blacks, and they have to be educated, they have to be helped, they have to be made aware of the situation they live in this country. And they have to be doubly strong than the other either African Americans or other minorities living in this country, because they have dual oppression. Foreigners, or they're born from foreign parents, and as African Americans or blacks. And that's why I am apprehensive of situations where young kids, simply go and join the stream, the mainstream, life, and end up in the streets or do whatever, young people like them do. I want them to think that they are people who have more responsibility, more probably sense of history in a positive sense, and that they have to aspire to live up to that expectation that comes from that background in history.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Amanuel. I will continue to engage with you on this subject in our show moving forward. Thank you, everyone, for watching the New Frontier Africa today on CABS World TV. Yes, that is the history of Eritrea, the history of the USA in Eritrea. You can get a copy on Amazon, right?
Or Lulu Publishing, LULU Publishing.
LULU.com.
Yes.
LULU.com. What is the national language in Eritrea? Is Tigray?
Well, we have different languages, but the primary languages that are spoken widely are Tigrinya and Arabic, and English also.
And English also. Okay.
We speak Tigray as well.
Tigray. Okay. Thank you so much for watching the show. Until we meet again, I say have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, AdbulRasheed.
Thank you so much.